Right, strap yourselves in because we are going deep on City of God by St. Augustine. But this isn't like your regular book club kind of thing. Imagine like a philosophical confessional, right? And Augustine is about to get absolutely grilled by Socrates, Joe Rogan, Kanye West, and Nietzsche. Talk about an all-star lineup.
Oh yeah, it's a clash of the titans for sure. Each one bringing like a whole different viewpoint on, well, life, faith, the whole shebang. Augustine's writing this in the 5th century as the Roman Empire is literally falling apart around him, and he's trying to defend Christianity. But our guests here, they're about to poke some serious holes in his arguments.
Right. And first up, I'm picturing Joe Rogan stepping into that confessional booth, totally fascinated by Augustine's colorful younger days. I mean, this guy was into Manichaeism, had a kid outside of marriage, and even admitted to, get this, stealing pears as a teenager.
Sure.
Not because he was hungry or anything, but just for the thrill of it.
Yeah, Augustine's Confessions is really something else. It's like brutally honest. It lays out his whole journey from like pleasure-seeking youth to, devout Christian, and that pear-stealing thing, that's like prime example of his intense self-reflection. He's not just, oh, I stole some pears, whatever. He's really dissecting his motives.
Yeah.
Grappling with the whole nature of sin.
Yeah, and Rogan would be all over this. I mean, he's had so many guests on his podcast, people who've shared their stories of redemption, transformation, all that. He'd probably see Augustine's wild youth as a sign that he was just like way ahead of his time, maybe even like a proto-podcast guest, sharing his crazy experiences with the world.
Right. Totally. And speaking of relatable struggles, imagine Kanye West jumping into the mix here. I mean, here's a guy who's very publicly wrestled with his faith, his ego, the whole sinner and saint thing. Augustine's journey from like wayward youth to a man battling his own inner demons, that would totally resonate with Kanye's own life experiences.
Okay, so now let's bring in the OG philosopher himself, Socrates. This guy is all about logic, reason, questioning everything. How would he approach Augustine's main argument in City of God, this idea that faith is the foundation for understanding?
Ooh, that's where things get really interesting. See, Augustine believed that human reason, like just using our brains, it can't fully grasp divine truths. You need faith. You need God's grace to really understand the mysteries of the universe. But here's the twist. Augustine wasn't totally against reason. He actually used logic and philosophy to defend his faith. And he even saw some good stuff in Plato's ideas, believe it or not.
So is it possible for faith and reason to coexist? That's a question for the ages, and one that Socrates would relentlessly pursue. I could almost hear him saying, like, Augustine, what is faith? Can it really exist without reason? Isn't that just a form of intellectual surrender?
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole hypothetical dialogue so fascinating. It forces us to really confront these timeless questions ourselves. Could Augustine, the champion of faith, withstand the intellectual scrutiny of Socrates? That's something for you, the listener, to ponder.
Ooh, good one. But wait, we're not done yet. Now imagine Nietzsche enters the room, the ultimate contrarian. And I have a feeling he would be less than impressed with Augustine's whole City of God concept.
Yeah, Nietzsche would probably see it as like a cleverly disguised PR campaign for Christianity. Remember, Augustine was writing this to counter the claims that Christianity caused the fall of Rome, right? So he presents this vision of two cities, the earthly city, which is, destined to decay, driven by all the worldly desires, and then the city of God, which is a community of those seeking eternal life, divine truth, all that.
Right, but Nietzsche would probably say that's just a recipe for guilt and self-denial. He'd much rather embrace human strength, the will to power, all that. Striving for greatness in this life, rather than putting all your hopes on some hypothetical afterlife.
Totally. Nietzsche would argue that Augustine's whole emphasis on sin and the need for salvation, it's just a way to control people, make them feel weak and dependent. He'd be all about self-reliance, pushing beyond conventional morality, achieving your full potential, even embracing those like darker aspects of human nature.
So we have Augustine caught in this philosophical crossfire, Joe Rogan, intrigued by his past, Kanye West, seeing a kindred spirit, Socrates, questioning his logic, and Nietzsche, dismissing it all as a holy PR stunt. Talk about tension.
And this is just the beginning of our deep dive, folks. Remember, Augustine's ideas are complex, often contradictory even. As we explore City of God further, you'll uncover even more layers to this philosophical onion, trust me. So let's unpack this two cities thing a bit more. It's not like Augustine is talking about, actual places on a map, right?
Right, exactly. It's more like a symbolic distinction, I think,
Yeah.
between two ways of life, two sets of values. Like you have people living right next to each other in Rome, but they belong to different cities based on, well, where their true allegiance lies, you know?
Exactly. It's less about your physical location and more about like how you live your life. It's like saying you can be surrounded by all the stuff of the earthly city, the wealth, the power, the distractions, but still be a citizen of the city of God in your heart, you know?
Right, it's about what you value most, ultimately. And this connects back to Augustine's ideas about sin and salvation, right?
Absolutely. He believed that we, as humans, inherit this flawed nature, you see, a tendency towards selfishness, disobedience. It all stems back to Adam and Eve, that original sin.
Ah, yes, original sin. That idea that we're all born with this predisposition to, well, mess up, choose the wrong path.
Exactly. Like we're hardwired for bad decisions, you could say.
And this flaw, this original sin, it separates us from God, according to Augustine.
That's right. We need divine grace, God's intervention, to overcome this inherent weakness and find salvation.
So true freedom comes from surrendering to God's will.
According to Augustine, yes. It's about aligning our desires with his plan.
I can already hear Nietzsche scoffing at this, you know? He'd probably say this whole original sin thing is just a way to make people feel guilty, powerless.
Oh, absolutely. Nietzsche would be all about the Übermensch, right? The individual who transcends conventional morality, creates their own values.
He'd say Augustine's view of human nature is too pessimistic.
Way too pessimistic. He'd say we should embrace our flaws, strive for greatness on our own terms.
And it's interesting how this all ties back to Kanye, don't you think? He seems to embody both sides of this struggle.
How so?
Well, on one hand, he's very open about his imperfections, his ego, his temptations, but he also has this drive to push boundaries, to achieve greatness, almost like Nietzsche's Übermensch, you know?
That's a great point. Kanye's music, his whole public persona, really, it often explores these themes of redemption, self-discovery. He grapples with his flaws, but he also sees himself as a visionary, someone who's meant to challenge the status quo. He embodies those complexities of being human, you know, the same complexities that both Augustine and Nietzsche were trying to understand in their own ways.
Absolutely. So let's bring it back to the listener for a moment. As you're delving into City of God, where do you see yourself within this whole spectrum of ideas?
Right. Are you more drawn to Augustine's vision of divine order, surrendering to a higher purpose? Or do you resonate more with Nietzsche's call to embrace your individuality, forge your own path, even if it means defying convention? Maybe, like Kanye, you find yourself somewhere in between, wrestling with those conflicting impulses within yourself.
City of God is a tough read for sure. It's dense, packed with philosophical arguments, theological concepts, but it's also deeply personal, you know, reflects Augustine's own struggles and triumphs.
Absolutely. And by engaging with his ideas, even if you don't agree with them, you're participating in a conversation that has shaped Western thought for centuries. Remember, our little philosophical confessional here, it's just one way of approaching Augustine. There are tons of other interpretations and perspectives out there.
That's a good point. So as you continue your deep dive into City of God, be open to new insights, challenge your own assumptions.
And most importantly, keep asking questions. After all, that's what Socrates would do.
Okay, so we've talked about Augustine's wild youth, this whole concept of the two cities, his ideas about sin and salvation, and, you know, how all of this might be viewed by, well, our imaginary guests, Socrates, Joe Rogan, Kanye, and Nietzsche.
Right, and let's not forget, City of God is very much a product of its time. Augustine was writing during a period of, like, immense upheaval, you know, socially, politically. The Roman Empire, which had seemed, well, invincible for so long, was crumbling around him. So he was trying to make sense of all this chaos, offer a source of hope, stability in a world that felt like it was falling apart.
So was City of God just like a PR campaign to make Christianity look good amidst all this turmoil? Or was it a genuine attempt to, you know, articulate a timeless vision of divine order?
It's something to think about, for sure. But before we wrap things up, let's zoom in on one more fascinating aspect of Augustine's thought. Remember how we talked about his wild younger days? There's one incident in particular that I think really captures his tendency toward, like, intense self-reflection.
Ah, you're talking about the pear-stealing episode from his Confessions, right?
That's the one.
Yeah, this isn't just a confession of petty theft, you know. It's like a deep dive into the psychology of sin. Augustine, even as a teenager, was fascinated by, like, the motivations behind his actions. He wasn't stealing those pears because he was hungry or needed them. He was doing it for the thrill of transgression, you know, the pleasure of breaking the rules.
It's almost like he was conducting a psychological experiment on himself, trying to understand those darker impulses of human nature.
And this fascination with the inner workings of the mind, this relentless self-examination, it's a key part of what makes Augustine such a compelling figure even today.
Absolutely. And, this incident also highlights a central theme in Augustine's thought. That conflict between our earthly desires and our longing for something more, something greater. Augustine believed that our hearts are restless until they find rest in God. But this rest, it doesn't come easily. We have to confront our flawed nature, our tendency towards sin, and choose to align our will with God's Ayla.
It's like we're constantly caught between these two cities, these two ways of being. We're drawn to the pleasures and distractions of the earthly city, but we also sense that there's something more, something transcendent that we're yearning for. And Augustine's City of God is his attempt to, map out this journey, right? To offer a guide for those seeking to find their way back to their true home.
Exactly. And here's where Augustine's genius really shines through. He doesn't shy away from the messiness of human experience. He acknowledges the power of those earthly desires, those pair-stealing impulses, the things that tempt us to stray from the path.
And it's in those messy human moments that we see the heart of Augustine's philosophy, I think. He's not advocating for some, unattainable sinless perfection. It's about recognizing our flaws, seeking guidance, and trying to live in alignment with a greater purpose.
Right, it's about the journey, not just the destination.
What's fascinating is that this struggle, this inner conflict, Augustine sees it as fundamental to the human experience. It's not about winning or losing. It's about the ongoing process of striving, seeking, and growing. A journey, not a destination. And it's a message that speaks to us even today, I think. Whether we share Augustine's religious beliefs or not, this idea of self-reflection, of confronting our shadows, it's a cornerstone of personal growth, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It all circles back to that famous saying, the unexamined life is not worth living. Augustine, even with all his theological complexities, was a pioneer of introspection. He knew that understanding ourselves is the key to understanding the world around us.
And that brings us back to City of God. It's not just some dry academic text. It's a reflection of Augustine's own lifelong journey of self-discovery. He's wrestling with these huge questions about faith, reason, good, evil, the meaning of life.
Yeah.
But he's doing it through the lens of his own experiences,
It's like he's inviting us into his own philosophical wrestling match, letting us witness his internal struggles, his triumphs. He lays bare his doubts, his aspirations, his conversations with something greater.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I encourage you to keep those questions alive. Don't just take Augustine's answers at face value. Challenge them, wrestle with them, see how they apply to your own life, your own journey.
And remember, our little thought experiment with Socrates, Joe Rogan, Kanye, and Nietzsche, that was just one way of looking at Augustine's work. There are countless other perspectives out there. Explore them, compare them, and see what resonates with you.
Exactly. City of God is a book that continues to spark debate and inspire reflection centuries after it was written. Engaging with Augustine's ideas, even if you disagree with them. It connects you to a conversation that has shaped Western thought for generations.
Whether you're drawn to Augustine's vision of divine order, Nietzsche's call for radical individuality, or find yourself somewhere in between, like Kanye. Remember, the journey of self-discovery, like the search for the City of God, is an ongoing one.
There's always more to learn, more to question, more to uncover about ourselves and the world around us. So keep exploring, keep digging, keep that philosophical fire burning.